Alright everybody, today I'm going to show you how to install a fuel pump on an 03 Fatboy and any Softail from that time frame, give or take a few details. Here's some of the tools I used. First step is going to be to jack the bike up. You don't absolutely have to do this, but I would highly recommend it. It's always good to have the bike more stable while you're working on it. If you got a friend, you could always have a friend there to help keep the handlebars out of the way and steady things up. Just going to bring it up far enough to get the forks straight, but not so much that it's off the ground and they'll move around. Alright, so now we're going to remove the seat. Your details may vary from mine. And gonna use the infamous 10 mil to disconnect the battery, the negative side. And then I like to take whatever I have that's convenient. In this case, it happened to be a glove. Keep that terminal isolated. Alright, so gonna loosen the cover on the speedo switch and then loosen the bolt on the console and take that off. Alright, go ahead and pull off the console, set it aside. Use some padding if you like, if your bike's not a rat like mine. Gonna disconnect the fuel pump. Disconnect the main switch. You may need to use a screwdriver to get yours pried off. I've been in and out of mine when I did this job, so it was fairly ready to go. And disconnect the display and disconnect the speedo. May have to do a lot of wiggling and pull them out of the clips and take the console off. Alright, get yourself a cable tie or twist tie or something. Get that wire bundle out of your way so you can work easily. And pull the bolt out of the panel. Alright, time to break those screws. This is a T20 if I remember correctly. Alright, got those all out. And as you'll find, there are seals that are on the screws that need to be pulled out as well. You could do this on the bench. I left it on the bike when I did it just to make filming it easier. So once you get those all out, it's time to start working this thing out of the tank. Now what I'm about to do with the screwdriver is loosen the locking mechanism. Now as you'll see, the frame wants to lock into place once you get it in the tank. See, it slides up in there. So what I'm going to do with the screwdriver is push it down so we can straighten it out and wiggle it out. Now if you look, this is where I'm going to put the blade of the screwdriver and apply some downward pressure to unlock it. If you're not lucky enough to have a little flashlight and big hands like myself, you may want a friend to help you with this step. You want to get the correct spot in there. There we go. You can see I broke it loose. And I'm going to start wiggling that bad boy out. Take your time. It might look like I'm monkey fisting it, but I'm using two hands to make sure I'm not applying too much pressure and losing control. And right here I felt that it was locking up on me a little bit, so I'm going to get the screwdriver back in there. Push down on that metal bracket for the float, and look at that unlock. Comes right out. And just take your time and wiggle it out of there. If you need to move hoses, nothing wrong with that. One time I had to disassemble the whole assembly there in my hands to get it out. Most important thing is to not rush. You don't want to break anything and have to replace more things. So very likely you're going to have a quick clamp right there. I happen to have some, a crimp clamp. I happen to have some screw clamps on there. Made my life a little bit easier. I'll show you how to undo the crimp clamps in a little bit. So we're going to take the hose off the back side of the pressure regulator. Wiggle it off. And if your bike's not an ugly rat like mine, you probably want to have some protection on top of the tank before you do that. Mine needs to be repainted anyway, so I'm not exactly careful with the finish right now. And continue working the assembly out. Until you get it free. Alright, so I cut the hose that connected the filter to the pump in the driveway, and it's sitting out there drying right now while I unbox the pump that I got from fuelpumpfactory.com. Shipping was fast, ordering was easy. Comes in a really nice packaging. Now, details from kit to kit may vary, but as advertised, they included some new zip ties. The pump itself was individually bubble wrapped to keep it safe. A new connecting hose, that's why I just cut the old one. A new bridge hose. I imagine if you're taking the whole tank off, you'll need that to replace that. The rubber gasket for the bottom of the pump, and then the particulate filter, as well as a new wiring connector and a couple of screw clamps. Alright, so here I am undoing the crimp clamp. The easiest way I found is to just get something small and strong under there and pop it up. And you want to slide it back on the hose or slide it off. Either way you can get it to go, or else you're going to have a heck of a time getting it off over that nub. Alright, so I'm going to pull the float assembly off just to make things a little bit easier to work on. It's just one star screw. There we go. Slide it down and out of the way. Now at this point, I'm going to start lining some things up, make sure they match, because last thing you want to do is get everything together and realize you don't have the right parts. So I'm just checking the big stuff, making sure the profile matches, make sure they look the same or close to it. Replacements are never exactly the same. In this case, I think the particulate filter was much better than the stock one. Going to cut the old tie straps. And pull that pump assembly out. The kit doesn't come with the new rubber sleeve. I had ordered one, didn't come in time. I figured since it didn't come with one and Harley's deprecated that part, that it's not all that essential. Well, that's up to your discretion. Gonna unplug the power connection. Alright, so on the new pump, there's a little cover on the inlet you got to pull off. Alright, so we're going to take the particulate filter and stick it onto the bottom of the pump. A little hand pressure. It's a pretty tight fit. Little locking ring comes in its own Ziploc baggie, so it's not easily lost. I picked out a socket that fits over the post, but still wide enough to cover the whole ring. This was after some trial and error. And just use that to push it on there. And as you can see, it seated nice and flush and locked onto the post. So you'll have one side of the tubing that's just a little bit more narrow than the other. You want that narrower side to go to the pump. This is also from trial and error. I widened it out a little bit with some pliers, some needle nose. It's still going to take some work to wiggle it on there, twist it on there. Just take your time. You don't want to break those plastic fittings. And got enough material on there now to put the clamp on. And go ahead and tighten the clamp. Now, because it's plastic, I was a spot here where the clamp didn't want to keep going down. And because it's plastic, I was a little worried about damaging it. So, just grab the pliers, brace the clamp until I got it through the tight spot. And then I was able to finish it up. Alright, so now for the filter, you want to unsnap the wire cage that's holding the assembly together. And there's a bracket that you're going to need to slide off on the opposite side. Just grab it from underneath with some needle nose and wiggle it back and forth to bring it out of the slot that it's in. You can also do this while it's still in the tank if you're having trouble getting the assembly out. That's what I had to do the first time I did this. And pull the filter out. Same thing as before. Widen the tube a little bit, make it easier to get it started. And I put the hose clamp on there already, if you didn't notice. There we go. Get it seated. Bring the clamp up and tighten the clamp. This time I decided to just not even take a chance and start off by holding it steady with the pliers. Alright, so you want to pop the filter down through the wire because the hose needs to come out from between. Put it back into the pressure regulator, and you're going to slide that bracket back onto the end. There's a little close-up to show you the tongue and the groove for the bracket. We're going to work that back into that groove there. For this I used a nice big flat blade, braced it against that outdent on the panel, and used it to wedge against the bracket and wiggle it in nice and slow. Alright, so I got it all the way seated. Gonna pop the retaining clip back over down into its grooves. Alright, so the next thing is you're going to have to replace the factory connector. It will not fit this pump. You can use whatever connection method you prefer. Just remember, it's going to be in fuel. It needs to last. You really don't want to do this over and over. In my experience, the best way to do that is to do some soldering. So I'm going to strip the wire ends off, both on the assembly side and then on the plug that came with the pump. And I'm going to feed some heat shrink onto the wires before I join them. And this is pretty straightforward. Red goes to orange, and black's going to go to black when we get there. Just twisting them together, giving them some rosin, some flux, and solder the joint. If you don't know how to solder well, there are plenty of YouTube videos on that subject. And I'm going to repeat the process with the ground side. Make sure you get a nice good connection. You don't want to pull this back apart for this purpose again. Going to slide the heat shrink down into place. And then go at her with the heat gun. I actually have a smaller one that's meant for this type of work, but couldn't find it. Use whatever you got. Alright, and plug that thing in. Now I'm going to start to assemble things here. Going to put the rubber bumper on the bottom of the pump. It doesn't really stay on by itself, so takes a little coordination there. Get it in the right grooves, hold it in place. And then we'll do a little close up here so you can see where these zip ties are going. There's two little grooves on the assembly where the zip ties are supposed to rest, and they're on all sides of that assembly. So I just get it in the general area, get it started, feed it in the grooves, and then zip it up. And then the same thing for the other one. And just because I know my fingers aren't as strong as pliers, you may have one of those fancy tools to do this for you, but hey, use what you got and tighten those zip ties nice and snug. Feels good, feels solid. Go ahead and trim those ends off now. And there we go. All we need to do now is reattach the float assembly. Don't go crazy here, you're just screwing into plastic, you don't want to break it. Alright, so you want to fish in there and get out your connecting hose from the outlet and start working that bad boy in there. The fit is going to be a little bit different in factory because of that particulate filter, but just take your time, you'll get her in there. There we go. Now what I'm doing right here is the bracket that the subassembly hangs onto with the pump, it tends to get a little bent when you're pulling it out of the tank, and if it's not perfectly perpendicular to the top bracket, it's not going to seat properly once you get it in there. So I was just making sure it was at a 90 degree. Alright, put the clamp on the hose and tighten the hose onto the pressure regulator. And now we're going to finagle the whole thing back in there. Once again, take your time. And I'm about to pop the bracket. And there you see it just go right down. Alright, so we're going to reattach the console real quick. Any guesses as to why? Well, we want to make sure that that fuel pump actually works before we screw this back on, because those screws are expensive and you have to use a new one when you redo this job. Got a nice whine from the pump. I'd say that pump is working. Alright, so we'll get it lined up and seated real nice. And start the screws by hand. Make sure the screws have the individual seals on them. Gonna have to disconnect the fuel pump temporarily. Now I use the impact driver just to get them started. You don't have to do this if you don't have very good control with your tools. And then I finished the tightening by hand. I just brought it down just to where the seal was in and the screw head was seated. Don't go any further. I have snapped the heads off of these, and boy, it's a pain because you got to take the whole thing back off. And it's snug as a bug. One last test to make sure it's working, and just reassemble the console in your seat and you're good to go. Thanks for watching.